Hey folks, welcome back. This is the second video about assessment for learning where I try to elaborate on some of the stuff we talked about in the first video, the different approaches from the clinicians and the overall idea behind it by using an example from my law class and examples from what Dylan Wiliam is using and suggests we use in everyday classroom procedure. So I'm going to share my screen with you in a minute, but I'm going to go through a few things that Dylan suggests you use as a quick way to ascertain student understanding and continually do that. And then I'll talk about how I use these in various classroom situations, and then I'll jump in and I'll use my law class to show you again the charter translation, which I've talked about before, and how I walk kids through that process using rubrics, using the approaches in AFL. So one of the first things Dylan emphasizes is no hands up. So he does popsicle sticks, and I do too. And I know a lot of people in the school are doing this, and people have done this for a long time. But I've only started doing this in the last 3 years, and I really find it effective. All the names of my students go on a popsicle stick and they go into a cup. And when I start discussions with students, there is no hands up because every student's expected to be involved. And so I choose them randomly. It's a Socratic method. People often use classroom planning or layouts with kids' names on them and just choose them randomly. That's fine too. But I find this system very effective. Every kid is involved, and I don't let kids off the hook. So if I choose a student and the student says, oh, I don't know, or I don't understand, then I work with that student to try and elicit a decent response or a decent answer. Why don't you understand? What can I help you with? Can you explain why you don't understand? And that way everyone is involved and expects to be involved when the popsicle sticks come out. It's just a super handy, easy way to get questioning going. Whatever questions you're using, big questions, small questions, hinged questions, it's just a very nice way to go. Another thing I do is if I'm teaching a new concept, a big concept, like when I teach section 15 of the charter, which is the equality section, and it has the word in particular in it, the phrase, what does in particular mean in this clause in the charter? And I'll say that to kids. That's really my hinged question. And then I'll teach it to them. And what I ask them to do is, as I go along, at a certain point, about 15 minutes into the lesson, I'll say, give me an idea now. Are you understanding? Flash the green. If you are partially there, you give me the yellow. And if you really don't know what I have taught you just now, or you don't understand it, you give me the red. And then in a class of 25, when all kids do this, you can see right away if your lesson has gotten through to them. If you have a majority of red, you're probably going to have to reteach it. If you have a majority of green, you could probably move on. And if you have more yellow than anything, then you need to pause and maybe have some of the green. And green means I understand it and I could teach it to others. Some of those kids maybe partner up and explain it to the students who are still not sure and the students who flash red. So these are called stoplights, and I find that a nice, easy way for teaching the major concepts. And a way a lot of you are using already is to have the whiteboards handy, and this is to get immediate student reaction. And some people are using things like Kahoots or Socrates or, whatever method you can to get instant feedback from the kids about what their understanding of something is pretty good. I use these at the end or the beginning of class, sometimes in the middle, to get kids to write certain things so I can see their responses, to get them working on a topic during class. But often, for example, after just teaching section 15 of the charter, which is a complicated section, the words in particular are not easy for students to understand. The next day, after having taught that, I will get the kids, as the first thing, an entrance ticket will be to explain to me what you think section 15 of the charter means, and especially the words in particular. So then by having them write down their responses, you will see immediately if that caught. And it gives an opportunity to reteach it or follow it up, and then also to see what understanding is. And just by using that method alone, in the last 2 years, I have seen dramatic improvement on that particular answer on the exam at the end, the summative exam at the end. I have seen improvement in my class results using that method with them. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you now, and I'm going to just walk through a couple things that we've talked about before. There's the intrepid Rusty back for some more AFL action. So one thing we talked about just now, and that is the unpacking of formative assessment. What's the process? And this is the Dylan Wiliam one. I showed you Sandra Erbst and Kathleen Gregory the other day. I like this structure. I like the Kathleen Gregory one. I use it all the time. And the idea, again, that you are clarifying, sharing, and understanding learning intentions. These are basically, what are you going to teach the kids today? What's the curricular competency that's involved? And then the process of eliciting evidence. How are you going to get evidence from the kids that they understand? And I just gave you some examples. And that might be other things like project work. They might be answering other specific questions. They might be solving a problem. They might be doing a drawing. They might be doing some sort of fill-in-the-blank graphic novel response. Whatever approach you use to see what the kids are learning is the evidence. And that's the evidence I highly encourage you to start putting into something like my blueprint in the child's learning journey. So in this process, we're activating students as learning resources for one another. We are activating students as owners of their own learning, and we are providing feedback that moves learners forward. And this whole process is a loop that you will start to do over and over again without even realizing it. So when I show you this is a nice summary, Dylan Wiliam's 10 principles of assessment, for assessment, sorry. And it's a very handy list of things that you could be trying and using every day in your classroom. These are the basic principles. Fosters motivation, promotes understanding of goals and criteria, helps learners know how to improve, develops the capacity of self-assessment. And again, core competencies is a real big part of assessment for learning, involving the kids in their own understanding. So I've talked about eliciting evidence, no hands up, I've already explained, and there are other options here. There are diagnostic questioning, using the whiteboards, exit passes, and many people are using this approach already. Using things like distractor-driven multiple choice questions, right? Show a multiple choice question to kids and have 2 right answers in the options, or no right answers. And you will get some interesting responses from kids. Another way to get them thinking more about it. Exit pass, answer this question in order to leave the classroom. It's an exit ticket. I like the entrance ticket for reviewing what kids learned yesterday, and there are many other approaches, but these are a nice summary of some of the things that work. Cooperative learning, kids as each other's resources. I've explained this already. Every student who enters my classroom has to do a presentation to the class. And by doing that, they are teaching a major concept to the other students, and they're also learning a major concept and then learning the whole process of presenting. And the idea around cooperative learning, which I think is very effective, motivation, social cohesion, personalization, cognitive elaboration, I think all goes into having students be a source of learning for each other. And one of the things, using the pre-flight checklist coming out of the rubric, for example, having students self-evaluate or evaluate each other's work and using the criteria to do that. So kids start to really know what is expected of them. So I emphasize this a lot with rubrics and with exemplars, and I'll just show you quickly. In my history as a teacher, I've kept all kinds of projects from every class I've taught. So if I went back to teaching First Nations 12, I would have a whole pile of projects that students have already worked on and use these as exemplars to students. Here's my History 12 class over the years. These are all great projects students have worked on. And I use these to show current students what good, great, not good looks like. In these projects, I obviously keep mostly the best ones, the ones that are exceeding the proficiency scale, but I also keep the occasional bad one and the occasional C+ one, as I'll show you when I walk you through my law charter project. And if you came to my classroom or my portable, you would see, and the hot stove guys know this, I have so many projects around my room that I also use as exemplars. If I'm doing a brain project like I do in psychology, I will show students, this is what previous students have done. You have to think up your own brain, develop your representation. It has to be 3D. And I give them exemplars. And I know this is happening all over the place in the building. People do this in the shops, obviously, showing good, great, not so great projects and asking the students to figure out where the flaws are, where it could have been better. And I just highly encourage this process. Keep the old projects as exemplars. Writing samples, for example. I haven't taught English for a long time, but it would certainly be in my English repertoire, keeping great essays, keeping great projects, and then sharing those with students. So let's take a look at my law project, and I'll talk a little bit about how I use this. So I've already talked to you about this, about how I have students. Their job is basically to translate the charter. And this is the charter here online. Kids can look at this, and they can also look at they get a handheld copy that I've ordered from the government, laminated and everything, that outlines all the sections of the charter. And when I go back to the curriculum to start this project, this is the Law 12 curriculum, right? The core competencies, the big ideas are listed here. And, this one is starting with a big idea. Laws can maintain the status quo and can also be a force for change. Well, clearly, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was a force for change. It changed almost everything about Canadian life, and it is the most important document in our legal system. So when you look at the elaborations in the curricular competency section, right, and you put the words "I can" in front of it, right? So you want students saying, I can assess the significance of the Constitution Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms to human rights in Canada. So by translating it, they are going to basically tap into the content, which is over here, the Constitution of Canada and the Charter. And by doing the translation, they are going to go through a process where they assess the importance of the different sections of the charter. And so they then do this in a group of 2 to 4 people. The group has to self-evaluate when they hand this in. They have to tell me on a sticky note what they think they deserve for doing the translation and what they think their partners deserve for doing the translation. And as we go through this, before we start this, we build the rubric, which I like using the single point one. And this is the example we used from the first quarter this year. So this was a blank document that I shared with my class on the screen, and I outlined my vision of what the project was going to be And then I said to them, what is the criteria? Let's develop this together. So we co-created it. And again, if you allow students in to co-create the criteria, you are going to get better buy-in. You are going to get better engagement. And so then when we agreed to this, I printed this off and made sure every student had a copy of this. And so at the end, they had to self-evaluate. And so when we came to the end, here are two examples. This was an absolutely amazing one, which I shown in an earlier video. This was an outstanding, this was the front side. There was another back side, just as full of information. All three of these students self-evaluated. And yeah, it's kind of a negotiation. And students are more honest than you think, more often than you think. Very rarely do kids try to sneak a fast one by you. And if they do, I just scoff. If a kid says, you know, for the next one, for example, let me show you that one. Kid says, oh, this is a 4 out of 4. We nailed this. I can look at this document very quickly and know that it's not a 4 out of 4. This does not exceed expectations. This basically met them. And the self-evaluation reflected that. Some of the kids gave a 2.5 out of 4. Some gave a 3. I left it at a 3 because they nailed some of the bigger sections, the more important sections. And, you know, they were vague in some areas. And so it was a fair mark. And when you do this with students, there's very little squabbling or squawking at the end. You go through the process with them, and they are basically, you know, involved in the evaluation because they self-evaluate, and then accepting of the mark. And sometimes what happens is, and this is kind of a good thing, is there is a feedback loop where I give the project back and say, okay, if it's really poor, if it's like a 2, if you really want to improve this, you want a higher mark, fix it up, hand it back into me. And then you're stressing quality, you're giving the kid the chance to improve, and it's a very AFL thing to do. Okay. Hopefully that will encourage you to try some of these approaches that the D. Willey group is using. There's a lot of this stuff going on around the school, and I highly encourage you to try some of it if you haven't. Remember, there are other topics here. There are other clinicians. The Kathleen Gregory, which is in the shared file, she has a lot of amazing stuff and a lot of amazing examples. And down the road, if you decide, if in a group, in a partnership, if you want to take some time from the district, there's tons of money out there for working with people in your department. If you want to take some time out, again, obviously it's a bit tougher now with COVID. But think of it down the road. You could take some time to actually think about some of these things and start tweaking them to your own practice. And of course, here was the list from Sandra Erbst, who was a great success at our school. She was very enlightening, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for Sandra Erbst. So if you liked Sandra, you would like her handout, which is in the shared file. And it's also attached to this email. Okay. Thanks again for listening. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like to talk about any of this down the road, let me know. Again, I encourage you to save these videos and these emails for when you have time. They're all going into the Fred Talk section of the folder. And I think they're a good jumping off point for discussing the new curriculum. My next topics are going to be startup, the name game, and using some handouts at the start of your semester, quarter, class, whatever, to learn kids' names quickly and get better classroom management right away. And I'd also like to do another video on Indigenous principles of learning and how to approach that in your class. So those are future topics. Thanks very much. And we will see you when we see you.